Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman. Good to see you all at the beginning. For day 2 of our budget hearing. So just a quick recap for everyone into what our plan is for today. We have 5 departments. We're going to start to jump into our individual department presentations. We have the Board of Commissioners first, and Suzanne Hawkins here with me, Assessment Department, and Tammy Tracy will be joining me. Records and Elections will follow with James Morales. And then we'll have the Juvenile Department with Matt Weatherall. And then finally, our County Council will come in and dazzle you with his budget at the very end. So he's batting cleanup today. So again, just as I started a couple days ago, I just want to again recognize all the great work that's been done. Lindsay's here today, and really appreciation for everything that she's been doing in coordination. I know she wasn't here on opening night, but I just want to recognize the hard work that she's put into this, and couldn't do it without her. So a lot of appreciation. And then of course, as I mentioned, our fine team of analysts, Jen Anville's here again, but we have Tally, who's behind me here today, supporting one of those agencies or one of those departments, excuse me. Again, just want to recognize the fine work that they have put into this. It's a culmination of a lot of blood, sweat, and tears over the last 6 months. So I'm going to go ahead and jump in and just kind of give you, since this is the first one, how we're going to handle these going forward. And it's a little bit different perhaps in the past. One of the things that this committee talked a lot about, I've read through all of your notes from 2 years ago, was something a little bit more specific as we get to the departments around the budget. And I'm going to try to jump in and do my best to really orient you towards from a high level in terms of what we're doing in relation to each budget and what are some of the factors. So I'll usually start on each of these, and then I'm going to turn it over to the department head, who will talk more specifically about the programs and the great work that they do and the services that go along with it and some of the new investments that they're requesting. So that's just a quick nutshell of how these will go. Again, as you have questions, feel free. I'll pause once in a while if just to make sure that you're getting all your questions answered. So with that, we're going to go ahead and jump in with the Board of Commissioners office. And so we'll start if I can get my clicker to work. No, it worked earlier. Shut it off and turn it on again. Okay, clicker's not functioning completely. So I know you all have
usually you have to aim that way.
Yeah, I've aimed both ways here. So there we go. Okay. All right. So just jumping right in as it relates to, and again, you saw this a little bit, but once again, this is a little bit different scenario than what you're used to seeing. Again, trying to give you a little bit more information between what was adopted, our current budget, to what we are proposing. So again, the concept of current service level, the concept of policy packages we talked about, you're going to see this within each department so that you can get a flavor of what's happening. So the Board of Commissioners current service level budget is projected at 6.56 million. And that's about 7% above what 21-23 was. So again, just to remind you of the total current service level increase as kind of a baseline, about 13.5 and 14% is what we see countywide. So this gives you an idea when we look at each department, so kind of how do they rank as it relates to the norm. And I would say with the Board of Commissioners, you can see at 7%, they're a little lower from a current service level. So good fiscal management, but also making sure that we're staying within reasonableness in terms of growth. So I would again put the Board of Commissioners at the lower end in terms of current service level growth. They are, though, requesting $466,000 within policy packages. And when you put forward the vacancy factor that we talked about, that's roughly a 13% increase. So now we're a little bit bigger, again, because of the policy package of the additional request. So again, this is going to be a little bit repetitive as I talk about current service level. What are the drivers? Again, similar to mostly everyone, our personal service cost with normal growth. Obviously, we have that. People getting salary increases, et cetera. We typically see that somewhere between 2 to 3%. But then in addition, we have some of the the bargaining that impacts this as well moving forward. Increased health care costs, increased PERS, again, very repetitive of what I said a couple nights ago. And then within the policy packages, what you'll hear is that there's additional position request. Talk about that here in a little bit. There's some reclassification request as well as community development. We've actually shifted one of their proposals into the Board of Commissioners office. And again, I'll talk a little bit about that when we get there. And then lastly, as it relates to the materials and supplies, again, you can see actually minus 3% in terms of current service levels. So there's some efficiencies that have been gained. A lot of that reduction is going to be in relation to JSEP, which is phasing down, as you will see when we get to the individual amounts, and that's one of some of your percentage increases are where they're at. So next slide, again, these will all be similar as we go through it. This is where we talk a little bit about how you spend the money. How's the Board of Commissioners spending the dollars? And to no surprise, 63% of it is on personal services costs. Again, that's where the majority of that is, and that represents 15 FTE is what is actually requested for this biennium, and that's 1 FTE higher than what it was in 21-23. Again, not a lot shifting going on here. It looks, both pie charts look about the same as it relates to how dollars are used. As I said earlier, you do have some reduction in materials and supplies. And again, that goes back to JSEP and some of the downsizing in relation to that. A lot of the contracts, one-time contracts that we were doing that we won't be doing next biennium. So next slide. All right. There we go. I promise you this is not an eclipse. This is probably the world's most boring graph. I apologize for that, but it's to show you that really the Board of Commissioners, it's one funding source. One, it's the general fund, and it's all discretionary. And when we get to these pie charts, one of the things, again, back to, I heard at least notes from this committee in the past, is when I talk about general fund, giving you an idea of what's discretionary versus what is dedicated. So you'll hear that a lot as I talk about and I get into these pie charts, so you can get an understanding of that. In some cases, things are driven by fees that are part of the general fund, but they are dedicated to the specific department. Whereas it's discretionary, it's typically your property tax, your discretionary revenues that I talked about in the budget message. So again, this one is all discretionary dollars, and that's why you've got the fun little sun there. Okay, so before I turn this over to Suzanne to talk a little bit about the department and some of the main areas, I just wanted to, this is kind of a next level down. So now we're getting into a little bit more detail within this department and the various areas you see. So the Board of Commissioners, really you have your Board of Commissioners themselves in terms of their particular cost area. We have the County Administrator's Office, the Justice System Improvement Program, Sustainability, Resiliency, Public Information Program, and then finally the Equity, Diversity, Inclusion. So those are all various components that make up the budget. Again, in total, like you said, like I said earlier, 7% increase for current service level, 13% overall. But now, kind of peel this back a little bit, you can kind of get a sense of, well, what's changing? So first and foremost, you see the big number of negative, 103%. That's the Justice Systems Improvement Program. And again, as a reminder, we've had a lot of one-time costs, as the commissioners well know, in relation to preparing for where we've gotten to this point and getting close to the bond measure. So those costs aren't expected next biennium. So we do have still some costs related to staffing that is in there that, again, there'll be some conversations about that going forward, but that's basically your biggest reduction area. When you talk about the Board of Commissioners themselves, so I know they probably, of course, have interest. You may say, okay, 24%. Let me explain that a little bit. So first and foremost, the growth from the Board of Commissioners is a couple things. One, dues and subscriptions, as I like to say, those have been in other areas of the budget, and those have been collapsed under the Board of Commissioners. So it's shifting from one part of the budget to another. So that's one element of the increase. The other one, as I know all three know, we have made a decision this biennium to have a firm hired to help us with lobbyist service, both at the federal and state level. That is built into this as well. So again, that's where your increases are coming from. When you look at that, Always like to put that out there. It's not that the personal services for the Board of Commissioners is increasing anymore. This is really driven by the materials and supplies place. Sounds like my microphone came on. The county administrator, again, 10% growth in current service level with 15% proposed. This is low. This is lower than the average. And the reason, because you're going to see an offset when we get to public information program, because you had staff that were administrative under that, and through a restructure that the previous county administrator did, shifted a position into public information program. So that's sort of an offset between the county administrator growing at 10% and which is below the norm, and the public information program growing at 89%. The equity and diversity inclusion, I want to touch on that just real quickly. That growth comes from increase in contract services. So the new manager for that particular area, actually the previous manager in that particular area, worked to get a translation contract put in place to be a benefit to the entire county. So this is recognizing that in terms of rolling that cost up. And so again, that's why you see some of the larger cost there. So those are kind of the areas I, again, just wanted to point out in terms of the office itself and what are some of the major changes. Certainly I will take a quick pause before I turn this to Suzanne to start talking about the areas to see if you have any budgetary questions.
I've got one. Would you go over the mechanics again of the vacancy factor? And just that's a new concept, and I think I understand the general idea, but
yeah. So yeah, vacancy factor, as we talked a couple nights ago, is a new concept that we've put in place to recognize the fact that, you know, there are going to be vacancies. There always is. And the way that's traditionally done is look at history. And part of the issue, and it's usually sometimes looking at the previous biennium, I don't think that's a fair way, because with COVID and everything that's happened over the last 2 to 3 years. So what I did is 6 years. So I gone through the last 6 years and determined what the average amount of vacancy that was have. In the case of the Board of Commissioners, it was actually relatively low, 2.8% is what I found. And so pretty stable in terms of position. So that equates to 115,000. And so that's a reduction that we're taking in the policy package area that gets you, and one of the reasons that, you know, keeps your cost a little bit more under control. Does that help, Commissioner?
Yes, thank you.
Bet. Okay, if there are no questions, I'm going to turn it over to Suzanne to do a little overview of the department.
Great, I'll just check first to make sure you can hear me all right. Great. I'm Suzanne Hoffman. I'm the interim county administrator. Prior to Joe Kirby, our prior county administrator departing, I was the interim health department director. Joined the county in October of 2020. To direct the health department when it was a pretty difficult time to recruit, and was just about to exit when Joe Kirby decided to leave us for sunnier skies in Colorado. So I'm here for a short time to just be a bridge to the next permanent county administrator. I did have an opportunity to come alongside Joe and Rick as they were preparing the biennial budget proposals for 23-25. But I do want to recognize that it's really Joe's hard work that has brought us to this point, and his incredible vision. And I know that he and Rick had many more conversations and opportunities to talk through this than I was able to be a part of. So I also want to thank Rick for being willing to jump in and do a lot more talking to help me than he may do with some of the other department directors. In looking at this slide, it gives you an organizational structure to kind of ground you in how the Board of Commissioners office is staffed. Obviously, the 3 commissioners at the top there, and then county administration, including the county administrator, as well as the incredible administrative staff who help basically keep the engine running every single day and help support the Board of Commissioners in all of the important work that they have to do. And then in the boxes down below are reflected the other programmatic areas and their full-time employees, as Rick described them: Justice Systems Improvement Program, Sustainability and Resiliency, our Public Information Program, and of course, Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion. And in the little orange or red box at the bottom is where we've made note that we are requesting one additional full-time employee for the Public Information Office. And we'll talk about that more throughout this presentation. The next couple of slides give you a bit more description on what each functional area of the Board of Commissioners office does. Their specific portion of the current service level budget, as well as the number of full-time employees or FTE allotment to each area. And I think the first three are pretty self-explanatory, and you have heard a lot about those. I think with regard to sustainability and resiliency on slide 8, you met Sean McGuire on your first evening budget hearing. He is a member of this Sustainability and Resiliency Program team, as well as another part-time employee, and their focus is really on identifying those sustainable activities for the county, everything from focusing on resiliency with relation to climate change, to recycling, to working collaboratively with other departments in the county around sustainability issues. And then, of course, our public information program is actually where we have requested the one additional FTE. And that is basically someone to work on web content update and to help to coordinate and lead an effort across the county to ensure that as part of our overall strategic communications plan, that our website information is up to date, easily accessible, user-friendly, and always with accurate and up-to-date content. And then last, but definitely not least, the Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion Program, which is still relatively new to the county. There is an incumbent in this one FTE role, and I think that she is only the second person to hold that role. And this budget contains not only her existing position, but some amount of work within the current service level to complete a comprehensive assessment that will help the county understand where to get the most value for the work that she does in terms of policy, training, education, and more across the county. For the Board of Commissioners, the goals that are highlighted related to the 2040 Thriving Communities Initiative, which you also heard about on your first evening of budget presentations. Our first goal is related to the core value of environment and natural resources and the Commissioner priority of community resiliency. Staff will focus here on creating a cross-departmental work group and begin understanding how all across our various departments we can make a plan for impacts related to changing climate in Benton County and the region. And you can see some due dates by which we expect these things to be achieved. Our second goal is related to this is all core values and focus areas and all priorities. And this is, of course, our public information program. And again, the effort will be to complete a standardized and comprehensive strategic communications plan that is countywide and focusing on internal communications as well as external outreach, media, stakeholder, community engagement, and of course, crisis communications. That will prove incredibly valuable moving forward all across the county. Our third goal, again, focuses on all of the core values. Specifically, Commissioner priority is on health and equity in all actions. And this is the assessment that I referenced earlier that our Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion Coordinator will lead. Goal number 4, focused on community safety, is of course the community safety and justice system improvement. And we know that regardless of the results of the bond measure, there's continued work to do, including identifying critical metrics and dashboards so that we can understand the efficacy and equitability and cost efficiency of the justice system improvements that we make, and to update the plan on an ongoing basis to always reflect current priorities. And then if by chance the bond measure fails, there may be a need to develop a new plan or look at how to leverage aspects of the assessment that was done originally, identify gaps and other critical needs. So the effort continues regardless. And finally, a focus on responsible governance. This is a goal to create a searchable database available to the public where you could enter key topics or terms in order to be able to identify motions or discussions by topic or issue. And working with our IT department, the goal is to have this in place by December 31st, 2024. And I'm going to turn it back over to Rick to review policy option packages, and I'll chime in if I can help to clarify or have more information to offer.
Thanks, Suzanne. And just before kind of jumping into the policy packages here, kind of ground us back to the discussion that we had in first night with Sean about tying goals to packages and investments. So one of the things in each of those 5 goals that Suzanne went through, you might note that it says either funded by current service level or funded by the policy packages. So you might want to take note of those, particularly as I start talking about the policy packages. One of those goals was partially funded that she spoke to, and another one was not recommended for funding. And I'm sure Suzanne can talk a little bit about that. So just wanted to make sure he kind of made those connections. And this goes back to what Sean was talking about, his little matrix of funding. So with the policy packages, so again, reminding us of that where we started, you had the current service level, and now we're going to talk about the policy packages that gets us to the ultimate proposed budget. So overall, it's a $351,000 increase with 1 FTE to the Office of Board of Commissioners. In total, and again, one of the things when I go through these, since this is the first time, when we go through these packages, we're going to be giving you information on all of the packages, even the ones that were denied, or at least I should say recommended to you, because I think it's important for you to see the whole picture and perhaps even ask questions about that as a budget committee. So we want to make sure you have the whole framework as we go through these. But in total, there was $671,000 worth of requests made through 4 packages. Based on our review, as we had talked about, the county administrator, Suzanne, and myself, we had recommended an increase of $366,000 for 2 of those packages. In addition, there will be something unique in here in that community development made a request that we are recommending be a part of the Board of Commissioners office. And again, I'll talk about that here shortly. And then when you apply the vacancy factor that Commissioner Malone asked about earlier, when you put that into it, that's how we ultimately get to that $351,000. So just some context. Overall, again, back to the percentage, this request brings us up to about a 6% increase in addition to the current service level from what was initially calculated. So we're going to go through these packages. First and foremost is what is called the administration and strategic planning. This is a one-time investment of $30,000, as well as a request for a reclass of a position to get a deputy county administrator in place. There is currently one position that is vacant, has been vacant for some time. I know the commissioners are very well aware of this conversation that has happened and the need to have someone a little bit more span of control as it relates to the Board of Commissioners, so that the county administrators and having to manage everything. And so I do think that this is a wise investment in terms of moving forward. The $30,000 is a contract that we would look to help us with our strategic planning and really kind of get a more crisp focus as we go into 23-25. So we see overall, this is really going to improve the administration and the strategic planning. And so that one was fully recommended at the $111,000 price tag that you see there. The second package, again, strategic communications, and this one does link back to the goal that Suzanne spoke of. This was a request for a 1.45 FTE increase of about 303,000. That was primarily for one position for, these are my words, I don't know if I'll say this right, IT will correct me at some point, but a webmaster, basically, in terms of being able to manage our communications a little more thoroughly on the web, making sure that we have fresh content in place and newsworthy information as it comes about. We did not recommend the 0.45, and that was additional administrative support. We thought that in the current county administration construct that we felt like we could leverage that. I know Joe had talked a lot about before he had left, really having his position kind of consolidate a lot of the administrative work amongst other departments and see how they leverage that better to be able to help. So I think we all agreed that, you know, again, nice to have, but we also need to be fiscally prudent. Let's definitely get the web content position. So that 255,800 price tag, that's what that's related to primarily, is that particular position. I'm sorry, Suzanne, go ahead.
Yeah, I would just also add that having spoken with our IT director about the appropriate placement of that additional web position, it really is, it is not necessarily an IT type of function per se. It is really more based on content, and those types of positions are often better housed within the program or the content area that they support. And so that's why it's within the Board of Commissioners office as a part of the communications team, because they will work so closely with content experts as opposed to necessarily the nuts and bolts of the technology per se. And this also includes the ability to reclassify one of the communications professionals into a supervisory role. And that is in part because the current county administrator position has probably more direct reports than would be recommended for an executive level person. And so as judicious as we, and I know Joe has been about being very cautious about when to add additional management staff. This is one of those situations where it will actually, I think, be very appropriate in terms of the span of control and providing, I think, more support to that area of communications.
So the next policy package is, as I mentioned, so when we get to community development department, I always joke with Darren Nichols about that. You will see the world's largest policy package in terms of a lot of great things and a lot of great ideas. And he will talk a lot about that. And again, good information. I think in terms of the discussion that we had, this package was really intended to be sort of a comprehensive look amongst all departments to figure out how we really sort of embrace more of the community development service model, because it does impact more than just the community development. And again, great stuff. But at the same time, trying to make sure that because for this to work effectively, it really needs to be all departments coming together. And so the discussion that we had is that we should put an investment forward to really get that kicked off. But all of the elements that come out of that, it's probably a little premature to jump forward and fund those until we really have that planning process and a good dialogue around it. So that's what the $100,000 is. And we really felt this is probably something that needs to be sponsored by the Board of Commissioners, because it really does involve all departments, and it needs to come from the top to say, yeah, this is what we're trying to do. So we only recommended $120,000. You'll hear about the $20,000 when we get to the community development. So $100,000 is what's here, and that would be for a facilitation contract to get the work going.
So on that one, that's not adding a permanent position. This is a contract.
No, sir. So thank you for the question. And yeah, the original package, again, it's going to be a whole bunch of stuff we'll talk about at some point. It did include a position, but our recommendation was not for you'll see, not jumping ahead, but we did not recommend that position in community development.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, sorry. So the last two packages are the ones that we did not fund. The first was the local food and agriculture capacity assessment. This was meant to be a one-time investment to really do what I call a gaps analysis across the county in relation to the needs and the supports that we need in our agriculture and food production. Again, good investments. The one thing that came up on this is that we did get awarded a state ARPA grant in this particular biennium through this, and it's going through the city of Corvallis, but essentially does the same thing. And so the idea was, that money is still in the works in terms of developing a plan. So let's figure out how we leverage that and be able to maybe take advantage of those resources and get what we want done here. So again, very good idea, but we think we have something within our own current service level that we can actually address that. And then the last one was the JSIP metrics reporting, and I'll probably punt a little bit to Suzanne on this particular area, but she had talked about, the needs to ensure that we have, corresponding, information going forward as we should the bond pass, being able to measure and have metrics and data and dashboard. Commissioner Ojiro talked very eloquently last night at the city speak in terms of that around measurements. And so we chose not to fund that. This was a request for a position. I think we believe that there has been work that has been put forward that we can leverage already. And then with maybe some additional supports here and there, we can probably get to this goal. We will get to this goal without having to make an additional investment for a position. But I'm going to punt to Suzanne if she wants to add anything.
Absolutely. Yeah. And talking with folks, and I'll be, of course, inviting Commissioner Ojiro to jump in because she's one of the leaders I spoke with to understand this more thoroughly, as well as Joe before he departed, and Rick, is that this is absolutely a body of work that has always been a part of the plan and needs to occur, but how it is going to occur is going to require, I think, more conversation to fully understand, and it may or may not require the addition of more full-time employees with the county. There are other organizations that have provided foundational work on this. There could be an academic contribution. In fact, the kind of work we're talking about is well suited to partnering with an academic partner. And so we just felt like, even though it is absolutely work that needs to be done, when we get on the other side of May, we will understand a lot more about our reality going forward. And then leadership can have thorough conversations about how best to proceed on this body of work and what resources will truly be necessary for that. And I would invite you, Commissioner Ojiro, to either correct anything I may have misstated or please add to that.
I think the one thing I would like to say is that we do have a pretty good sense what those metrics should be. We had a list coming out of the Criminal Justice Systems Assessment in 2019. It does need to be elaborated and refined. And Gobi, Greater Oregon Behavioral Health Inc. did help us with some of that work. I think the most important thing is that the data streams exist, but they are all in different departments. And so the most important things are that we need to have the resources of IT and their data mart, or they don't use that term here in the county, IT, but in order to synthesize all of those data streams and put together any kind of synthetic metrics. And then we need help with the dashboard element. So I think we need to have that discussion at a high level across departments. as to how we're going to accomplish this goal. And then who is going to be the steward of that data, and where it resides. And because it's cross departmental, again, it may be that it best belongs here in the Board of Commissioners office, but I think we need to have conversations with the other electeds like the district attorney and the sheriff, and with our colleagues at the courts in order to best determine how to move forward, have the right buy-in.
So just like
Commissioner Wise. Sorry.
clarifying question, so the 232,109 that was requested, was that just to cover the one FTE, or were there additional items in there in that?
Thank you, Commissioner Wise, for the question. It was just the FTE.
Okay, thank you. And then going back to the local food and agriculture capacity assessment, which division of the BOC office did that come from?
Sustainability.
Yes.
Okay, that's what I was guessing. Thank you.
Commissioner Irish, I'm sorry, I'm jumping ahead a couple of years.
That's okay. I'm a planning commissioner, so that works. I have some clarifying questions on the local food and agriculture capacity assessment. You said that there's state ARPA grants going through the city of Corvallis currently to address this need. Can you expand on that for me a little bit?
Yeah, so during the 2021 legislative session, you might recall that's when the state had a bucket load of money through state ARPA dollars, the US Treasury dollars. And each legislator had an opportunity to fund a particular project. This particular project was Representative or Senator Gelser's, Senator Gelser's allocation, and it was specifically, quite frankly, this was a city of Corvallis request that was made to do an assessment. First, an assessment of the agriculture on the South Corvallis, I think is how it was defined, specifically to do an assessment on where there are gaps in the food and agricultural, where there are opportunities. And then after that assessment, it was intended to go through and do actual implementation of strategies to be able, that's where the dollars were supposed to be put forth. I will tell you that that's been so slow to get going. We still have dollars that we're working with agreement with them to kind of get that put in place. And that's where I think that there is an opportunity to maybe expand on that. I hope that's helpful.
I can expand just a little bit. The money was really to investigate the potential for a food hub. And that food hub would have been most likely a partnership between Community Services Consortium, Benton Food Share, and other partners. And it was, and part of what the needs assessment was for is to determine exactly what the function of that food hub would be. There are models around the country of this sort of food hub, and it's been a dream of folks here in town for probably the last 15 years. And this was the first time we'd gotten something funded. But with Kate Portia's departure from the city of Corvallis, she was the leader on this, and so it's basically been dormant for a while.
It seems like a really great idea, actually. So that's why I wanted clarification.
Yeah, and I failed to give you the amount on that particular allocation was $550,000.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions?
Then I'll kick it back to Suzanne and she'll wrap up with the challenges and opportunities.
Absolutely. So some things that are challenges and opportunities at the same time, but we've landed on one of our challenges is obviously we're just in the midst of a new county administrator recruitment. And that job posting just went live this week. So we're excited about getting to that milestone in the process. And I think if I remember correctly, the first review of applications is right around the third week of May. And depending upon what that applicant pool looks like, could move forward to next steps or could keep the job open and continue to accept applications coming in. Of course, challenges being the Justice System Improvement Program if the bond measure is not approved. Like many other employers, we have human resources challenges in terms of recruitment and retention. And then, of course, just increasing costs and reduced resources are often challenges to manage around. And then our opportunities, county administrator recruitment. So both sides of the coin there. Also, the opportunity to have a deputy county administrator. And if that is a role that, although it is in the budget, we would expect the next permanent county administrator to be able to make that selection. And that person may decide that perhaps a different level of support is what they need. But the budgetary resource, if this is approved, will be there and available to them to make use of, which we think will be of great support to that new county administrator. We also hope that this is a great selling point to the job as well and can help attract quality candidates. And of course, the opportunity of JSIP if the bond measure is approved, and the opportunity to have a fully staffed department, which has not been the case since the third quarter of 2021.
Questions, comments? No? Thank you very much.
Just one comment, we use the term or the abbreviation FTE, and if my memory is correct, it's full-time equivalent, meaning it could be 2 half-time positions. I mean, you add up the full-time and part-time, and that gives you FTE.
Thank you, Chair Malone, because I think I misspoke and said full-time employee, but you're right, it is equivalent because you could have more than one person standing in that spot.
And I have a feeling we will hear this term sometime later in the presentations.
So Commissioner, joke a little bit. I remember a time at the state legislature that when you used an acronym, you actually had to put $1 in the bucket. So, you might test me on this. If I use too many acronyms, you can send me a bill.
The plus side to acronyms is it makes the meeting shorter.
With that, Mr. Chairman, that concludes the Office of Board of Commissioners, and we're ready to move to assessment if you're ready.
Assessments is not right.
So we'll move into the assessment department. So now that we've got one under our belt, kind of the same format here. I'll probably just primarily, again, this time cover just the first part, and Tammy will cover the balance, but certainly we will help each other and bounce off each other as we go. So again, great to have Tammy Tracy here, county assessor, to be able to help provide an overview of the assessment department. So let's just jump right in terms of budget. So again, same type of format here is that we're looking at a $5.87 million current service level budget, which is approximately 23% above 21-23. So I'm just going to jump right in and touch on that because, again, back to your measuring stick of the 13.75 on an average. This one may seem a little above average. Let me explain that. Number one, there is, if necessary, Tam, you can correct me on this, there was a bit of a misbudget, if you will, for the current biennium, where there was an expectation that contract services for a system administrator or systems services to support our systems was going to be prepaid in the previous biennium, but that didn't happen. And therefore it became a budgeted cost because you can't do the prepay, something that actually we've had to eat this particular biennium, and we don't want to do that again. So we're making sure this is sort of a corrective action to something that actually happened so that we don't fall short of budget again going forward. So that's a big factor to that little bit higher percentage. The other thing I'll mention with Tammy is that, she's blessed with having, some positions that have been both topped out, and part of the actual increases that we got through the union negotiated, they also included some step increases. And so you got a lot of that in the case, unlike just a standard percentage, they actually got a full step increase. So that contributed to a little bit more cost in Tammy's area. And then again, and I probably do a horrible job of explaining this, but she has, positions with her appraisal team that have what I call like kind of progression of being able to progress through the classifications was a little bit different. And so you can imagine if you're budgeting for an appraisal 1, right now, appraiser one right now, and that person progresses through, you can see over time, it would create an additional cost. So again, I want to, stand up for Tammy here in that while this percentage is a little bit higher, there's good rationale behind both the 22% and the 26% you see in material or personal services and materials and supplies. In addition, you'll hear from Tammy about $365,000 that is in her proposed budget. That will bring it to 6.03. So again, a policy package, one package is recommended, and that's going to bring her up to about a 26% total increase. Back to the vacancy factor again, as Commissioner Malone asked last time, I want to make sure that I am clear with on the assessment department. Tammy's is about 4.5%, which again, I consider from my perspective on the lower end. It's not the high, it's kind of almost in the middle. It's usually about an average of 4.5%. So Tammy's right about where you would expect. And that's about a $200,000 that we would reduce to our budget with the anticipation of vacancies going forward. Not going to repeat the drivers again. They're pretty much the same as you heard with Board of Commissioners. You're going to hear this through all of them. I mean, obviously, salary growth, PERS cost, growth in healthcare, all of those are factors in relation to just growing the current service level. As I already explained with materials and supplies, standard inflation that we use is 5.5%. Plus, she had that little technical contract thing that sort of kicked her materials and supplies up a little bit more. Again, when you look at the request that she's proposing, the $365,000, that's all in materials and supplies. So that's why you see that big 59% in the proposed budget. So again, just give you that explanation. Again, categorically, this one, pretty much everything has kind of stayed the same for the most part. I guess from a shifting standpoint, there's more money being put towards materials and supplies because of the investment that we mentioned. So, but personal services obviously would go down just because you're spending more on materials and supplies. So not a lot of shifting, changing around there. Next one, hey, a little bit more of a colorful graph than the last one. You don't have a clip. So now for me as a CFO, this is where I get excited with pie charts and I get to see all the different types of funds. And so as we go through all these departments, when you start to see a lot of little slices of the pie, it gets me a little excited. So the assessment department is 100% general fund. So, but let me again, as I mentioned to you earlier, something a little unique. When we talk about general fund, there's dedicated and there's discretionary. So in Tammy's case, 14% of the money that goes into the general fund is dedicated. And that's primarily from the county assessment function funding assistance. You might have, Board of Commissioners might remember, you just approved the application. Jane Sievers was here. And actually, Tammy may be able to answer one of the questions in relation to that. I think the question being is that's been somewhat or seemingly a somewhat stable grant over time. And are there opportunities for that to get bigger? I think was one of the questions. And Tammy might be able to address that a little bit in her comments. And then she has a relatively small portion of various service charges for application fees. So all in all, about a 14% of dedicated. Again, the majority, 80% is discretionary dollars that's generated through primarily the property taxes. The last piece before I turn it over to Tammy, her functional area isn't quite as spread out as the Board of Commissioners, as you just saw. It's primarily in one area, the valuation and tax extension. The capital improvement project, that was a project that she had approved through CIP last time. We'll talk a little bit more of this as we progress through the hearings, but CIP is currently on a hold until after the bond measure. And so that's why you won't see some of these in here. You'll obviously have money dedicated for it. And I'll talk about some of the proposed projects, but you won't see some of those proposals. And I know Tammy will actually be in, she has a couple of those that she is putting forward. So again, this one, not a lot to show other because you only have one area primarily. So that shows where the increases are at. And those are pretty much the same at the 23 and 26. So with that, I'm going to turn over to my colleague here to take you through the rest of the presentation.
Thank you. Good afternoon. I'm Tammy Tracy, the Director of the Assessment Department. And just to touch bases real quick on CAFA, this funding has actually diminished over the years. Back when I started in 2003, we were getting about 25% of our funding through the CAFA grant. So it's actually steadily declining. There has been a work group that was just established during this legislative session for different parties to come together and look at potential funding for our assessment functions. So more to come on that. Hopefully, all of the important parties can get together and start funding a little bit of the assessment department roles and responsibilities. Okay, so the assessment department is fully staffed with 17 full-time employees. We have two divisions in the assessment department. We have the appraisal division that report to the chief appraiser, and we have our administration and cartography section staffing that reports to our chief deputy. Our mission, the mission of the assessor's office is to administer the property tax program accurately, fairly, and efficiently in compliance with Oregon state laws, and to provide the very highest level of customer service to those that we serve. Assessment's responsible for valuing all real and business personal property at 100% real market value, establishing the maximum assessed value for every property account, maintaining property information and ownership, and administering various programs such as exemptions, special assessments, and manufactured home processing. Our department is requesting $5.87 million in the 23-25 current service level budget to ensure that it can perform the statutory function of the county assessor under Oregon law. Again, our primary functions include valuing all of the business and real personal property, mapping, processing land changes, administering special programs such as farm forest, special assessment, senior deferral, maintaining property ownership, addressing information, processing all exemptions, and again, calculating Measure 50 taxable values and extending property taxes for all properties. In 22, our department valued 40,083 real and personal property accounts in the county at a real market value of a little over 22.6 billion, with a total taxable value of a little under 10.4 billion. Total taxes extended in 22 were $105,000 for 51 taxing districts. Each year, the department reviews all district budgets, ensures all request rates and amounts, computes the annual tax rates for all taxing districts, and assures uniform distribution of taxes to those districts. Assessment maintains and updates 1,451 maps currently consisting of 37,190 tax lots, which are utilized by various county and city departments, as well as numerous other agencies and the general public. So we have identified 3 goals that align with the 2040 Thriving Communities Initiative. All 3 goals address the same focus area, environment and natural resources, as well as the same commissioner priority, responsible governance. Our first goal is by June 30, 2025, to ensure all property jackets and historical content, which is, we have about 41,000 jackets, are electronically scanned and linked to the account on the assessment property search website. This is funding is requested in a policy package, which I'll touch on a little bit later. Goal 2 and goal 3, both funding comes within our current proposed operating budget. The second goal is by June 30, 25 to have all of our tax lot cards added to the assessment property search webpage. And our last goal is a collaborative effort with community development to complete an internal analysis on the ability to link permits from community development with our assessment data. Based on the findings, we will create an implementation plan to link the data on the assessment webpage no later than June 30, 2025. Okay, on to policy package summary. Are you going to touch base this? Or
Would you like me to, or?
I can read it.
Okay.
It's fine. So in addition to the assessment department's 23-25 current service level budget of 5.87 million, I requested an additional 1,395,000 for 3 policy packages. Based on the review by the county administrator, an increase of 365,000 was recommended for 1 policy package 1, with the balance to be requested through the CIP program. This request, along with the recommended vacancy factor that Rick discussed of $200,307, creates a recommended net increase of $164,693 in the general fund. In total, this request represents a 3% increase to the assessment's 23-25 operating budget. Okay, so 3 policy packages I presented. The first policy package is back to goal 1. And this is a one-time expense to scan all of our historical information in our property jackets. This is a significant project which will not only provide all of the historical valuation documents online, but will change our internal appraisal process to paperless. This past year, we successfully converted our business personal property program to paperless, and we implemented e-filing for the 23 tax year. So this project is the next significant step for our department to go paperless. And the $365,000 is a contractor estimate to complete the project. The other 2 policy packages, I'm sorry, were not recommended for funding. The first one was the new assessment and tax system, which I want to come back to because I'd like to talk about this one. It's a critical conversation. And the second is vehicle replacement. This is a request for a one-time cost of $30,000 to replace our existing insufficient old SUV with a new hybrid SUV. At the current fleet replacement rate, we will not have sufficient funds to replace this 2008 vehicle until 2031. This purchase would decrease actually our operating and maintenance fleet rate by $120 a month, with a total general fund savings of $2,880 over the biennium. So again, this is also submitted to CIP for funding. So I wanted to go back and talk about the A&T system. I felt that this is important enough to make all of you aware of it and my proposal for change. We have been on our current platform since 2001. We currently utilize 2 independent systems, one for valuation called ProVal, and one for tax calculation and ownership called Ascend. Neither of these systems have been modernized for the last 22 years, and they are not integrated systems. The support for both systems has been less than sufficient for several years, which has not only consumed a great deal of our staff time, IT staff time, but as discussed earlier, led us to hiring a consultant in 2021. The systems have limited functionality and require a great deal of duplicate entry, triple entry, and offline databases. Statutory reports and ratio analysis must all be completed manually. There are only 5 remaining counties in Oregon on our current platform, Ascend ProVal, Benton County being one of those. Last summer at our conference, we were notified by our vendor that the tax software Ascend, the 2 employees that supported our very complex Oregon system were leaving the organization. They left. They had no cross-training or succession planning in place, and to date, they have not retained anyone with Oregon experience. This leaves the future of the product very uncertain and the health of our system at risk. We immediately began evaluating other options, there are only 2 of in Oregon. Their 2 systems range tremendously in conversion cost as well as annual support fees. Our staff has had demonstrations of both systems. We've had lengthy conversations with our IT department, as well as counties currently on the other 2 platforms. We have concluded the best option for Benton County is a local vendor, which is based out of Salem and has been supporting Oregon counties for many, many years. This platform is one integrated system and will allow for many technology efficiencies, workflows, integration with our records department, and elimination of duplicate entry. All reports and analysis required by statute are completed within this system. This A&T system is currently used by 26 Oregon counties and is, I mentioned, utilized by Benton County records and elections for their deed processing, as well as the Board of Property Tax Appeals. This allows integration for ownership information between the systems. This A&T system is also used for 3 of our neighboring counties, Lynn, Marion, and Polk. We actually spent some time at Lynn County, having them show us the system in use. And the good news is that this is also a much more affordable option than the other. The total conversion costs and licensing fees would be no more than $500,000, not the $1 million that was initially stated in the policy package request. Our current 23-24 support and maintenance fees are budgeted currently in our current system at $240,000, which includes an outside consultant fee of $30,000, and our system is not cloud-based. The annual maintenance fees for the proposed system, which includes cloud hosting, which was requested by our IT department, is approximately $165,000 a year. So the overall maintenance fees with the new system would decrease approximately $75,000 per year. And in essence, the savings and maintenance fees would pay for the conversion within 6 to 7 years. So I just wanted to spend a little time, even though that was not recommended for funding. I just think it's something very important to bring forth to the budget committee. All right, so challenges. Again, in the upcoming biennium, our biggest challenge is related to our software. I'm hopeful that the budget committee will see the necessity to fund our requests for a new system. We will either continue to be challenged with our current technology or begin conversion to a new modern system. As we all know, data conversions, especially one of such magnitude and of critical importance, will be an enormous project and a strain on staff and resources. However, challenges turn into opportunities. If we do receive the funding for a new A&T system, the conversion to a new modern single system creates an enormous amount of opportunity for the department. The new system will eliminate duplicate and sometimes triple entry of information. It will eliminate the need for offline databases. And again, all statutory reports and analysis will be completed within the integrated system rather than offline. This will free our staff up to focus on projects and improve our day-to-day business processes. That's all I have. I'm happy to answer questions.
And Mr. Chairman, if I might just really quickly add to what Tammy was saying about the systems, and I think this was a big discussion that we had with county administrator and the interim county administrator, and everything's Tammy said is exactly right. It's definitely a critical investment. Obviously, we use CIP, Capital Improvement Program, is the program where we have set aside dollars that would typically do capital type project, and that is currently we're holding that. We have it built here into the budget. We're holding the total amount until we have more information around the bond measure about how we want to make those investments. But I just want to reiterate, I mean, it's an important system. And again, the $1 million price tag is now lower. So that's a good thing. And I think one way or another, though, we're going to need to try to figure out how to make this happen, because as Tammy said, it's going to have real impacts.
Do you have a final number for what that lower number might be?
It would be no more than 500,000, between 400 and 500,000. And we just got the updated support fee of the $165,000 a couple of weeks ago.
Commissioner Wise.
Thank you for going over that. I welcome and encourage all staff to tell us, what didn't get funded, and make sure that we properly understand. So I appreciate that. Depending on how the bond and state funding turn out, it could still potentially be funded by the CIP. Is that correct?
Commissioner Wise, that's absolutely correct. We have, and I will be sharing with you as we get into the presentation, at least so you have knowledge of what those requests are. I will say it's oversubscribed as it typically is, so there would have to be priorities and decisions made, but yes.
Thank you.
I have a question.
Ms. Irish.
This program that's out of Salem that it sounds like you're leaning heavily towards.
Correct.
Have you researched whether or not their, language that they write their program on will also be outdated in the near future? What kind of longevity do we have? So while it may be cheaper, does it have the longevity that we would hope it would?
Sure, that's a good question. We have actually brought along our IT staff on this entire process. They've been heavily involved and they feel that this is it's a big step in the right, it's a huge step in the right direction. This company is constantly developing and improving their product. Every year they're coming out with something new. So yes, I would say it is here for the long term. And I think more and more Oregon counties will actually be going to this system. The other system that I mentioned, there's only 5 counties, I believe, on it. Lincoln County just recently went to that system and they are not getting support. Their maintenance fees, just to give you an idea, annual maintenance fees for the other product is $300,000 a year. And we're finding that, we've talked to the other counties that are on this product because it is a nice looking product. The concern is lack of support, lack of commitment to promise. Lincoln County is struggling tremendously. They converted just this last year. And if they could go back, they would have made a different decision. So I feel really confident in the path that we're taking. And again, it's nice that we have integration with our records department and our neighboring counties are willing to just, help us get through all of this. And I think that's a huge benefit as well. So
Thank you.
you're welcome.
Commissioner Malone.
Yeah, I appreciate the explanation because when I first saw the $1 million in CIP, that's not a very good fit. Especially in the upcoming budget, but I guess I'm a little concerned leaving it up to if it's as critical a piece of software as say. I guess I'm wondering why we're leaving it to CIP to fund and at this point, at least I don't have any notion maybe even how much money would be in the CIP pot, let alone what kind of requests that there would be.
Yeah. Commissioner Malone, thank you for the question and a couple things. So back to sort of the open night presentation, one of the things that we tried to do here is strike a balance between making strategic investments and still maintaining an adequate level of reserves that we all know is going to be so important for us as we move forward. So, budgeting is always about choices in terms of, trying to figure out the highest priorities. One of the things, again, looking at the 5 or 6 of you in relation to the budget committee, and I've heard is, you have opportunities as well. So I would encourage you to think about through all these presentations. The way I've set this up is not only for you to hear about what is recommended, but what wasn't recommended as well. And as you go through this, I would, encourage you to think about that. And certainly if you feel that there are priorities that need to shift, then absolutely that's something that we would do. We will look to your leadership for that. So again, it's like you wish you could always fund everything, right? And it was just trying to balance to the investments to the money that we wanted to keep retaining as well.
So the alternative is to tease the current system along for 2 more years.
So Commissioner Malone, I think at this point, as you know, we will certainly put it forward to the CIP. If that were to fail, I think what I'm saying is I think this is something that we will have to come back to address. I certainly don't think that's the best option to be able to bring the system along. I think we'll just have to look at other alternatives.
Thank you.
Commissioner Wise.
I just wanted to agree with what Rick said. And, you know, the way I look at this is, I mean, we're just at assessment. We're going to have several other budget presentations, and we're going to be looking at a lot of hard decisions. And there's going to be a lot of things that we wish we could fund. And so the way I'm thinking about it is I'm going to keep an eye out for those things. And it's a conversation that we can have, you know, toward the end, once we've heard all of the different budgets.
Exactly right.
And I would just add, my concern is the other 4 counties that are on Ascend Proval. They're looking to move. So what happens if Benton County doesn't move? So I just keep that in your mind, because that is what concerns me, is if everybody bails. Number one, we're going to be last standing. What does that mean for the system? And 2, we're going to be in line to make those conversions when we do get the funding. So just something to keep in mind, please.
My sense is that we have to make this change. It's just a question of whether it's coming out of this pot of money right now. And so I'm looking forward to hearing all of the other presentations, and looking forward to May 16th. And we will have much more clarity as we move forward.
And Commissioner Malone, I feel like I didn't do a great job of answering your question. And I guess I would just add one more thing to keep in mind, and it's probably a fair question to ask Tammy as well. Keep in mind, this particular budget does have a $365,000 investment for one of the package. I guess one of the questions back to priorities. Again, remember, initially it was $1 million. So that was obviously a pretty expensive. Now that price tag is less. I think maybe there's always the conversation, what's a bigger priority? And I don't want to speak for Tammy. I'm sure she has an opinion on that. So, but that's, again, not telling you guys obviously where you want to land, but those are options. So Tammy, I'd invite you if you want to add anything.
I think it's clear between the two projects, which is the most critical. Of course, we would like funding to follow the goal and the 2040 initiatives, and work on our progress to becoming paperless. I think if it had to be a choice of one or the other, I think clearly it needs to be the tax system. It's the revenue generating system for the county and all of our districts. So I think it's critical.
And the other goal of contracting to scan all of the other documents and go paperless could be done without competing with other counties for that bandwidth from another outside company. So, yeah.
Sure.
A little quick arithmetic, $365,000 pop ask for the scanning, plus 75,000 of savings per year, gets you in the ballpark of paying for the new software.
Just a couple of years, yes.
Like my arithmetic.
Outstanding, Commissioner. Outstanding. We have a job opening.
All right.
Anything else? Any further? No?
Okay.
Ms. Tracy, thank you very much.
All right, thank you.
Mr. Chairman, we good to keep going. Just want to test you guys, make
Sure.
sure you're all
Okay.
feeling good, keep powering through.
Yes.
Definitely.
Okay, with that, I think we're ready to move to records and elections, and James Morales is going to join us. James. So we're going to move into our third presentation here with James, and again, sort of kind of following the pattern. I'll do a little bit of the talking, and James will dazzle you with the rest of it, because compliments to James. He does he does a great job with his budget and is very diligent in his management of the budget. So we really appreciate it in the financial services department. So jumping right in, as it relates to the records and election, we're looking at a $3.22 million budget for 23-25. This is 12% above the adopted level. So again, I would consider this below average, not below average in terms of James, but again, a very prudent spender here. He is at 12%, which again is slightly lower than our average across the county. He does have some request for some additional funding of about $138,000. That's going to buy him a 3/4 time FTE. And he'll talk a little bit more about that. It's currently a limited duration position, but we definitely would like to see that move to a permanent. He can talk to you about those benefits. A pretty small vacancy factor. I know James is a relatively small budget. I always want to be really careful with the smaller budgets, but at 2.8%, he's pretty low, $48,000, and that's what we have traditionally seen. But as always, we will manage that carefully, and if we run into situations, we'll be there to help James through that. Again, not going to spend a lot of time on the fourth bullet because it's all the same thing you've heard me say before in terms of the primary drivers as it relates to the personal service cost and all of the other. The only additional that would drive the personal service cost up a little bit more as a total package is the 0.75 FT, and that's why he's in his personal service area up to 15% when you look at 23-25. His materials and supplies increased again to standard inflation that we use for everyone. And a piece, and I probably failed to mention this with Tammy's budget, but this is something that you're going to see across the board. And part of material supply is also central operations and it's rent that is paid. So as a reminder, here in this beautiful building, Calapooya, and everybody is very, very ecstatic about it. But this biennium, we're now feeling the full URR from the bonds that were issued in relation to that. So last biennium, as a reminder, this was sort of paid with a general fund while we were doing the constructions. Now we build that into the actual rent component. So now we start to see that impact, and with it becomes an increase. So as I mentioned here, 62% for James. It's again, a big number, obviously a smaller budget, but those are costs associated with that. And then, I'm also to blame here as well. My department, when I get to my budget, you will hear me talk about some pretty big numbers of growth, and all that is mostly about centralization. I'll also point out as we go through some of the other departments that decreased to offset that. But again, it's cost, IT cost, human resources cost that contributes to that. To the categorical, again, not a lot of changes here. Basically just a slight increase in more money being spent on personal services than materials and supply. And that is only a simple result of James having a 3/4 time FTE. So we won't spend a lot of time on that. My favorite pie chart here is, again, just to kind of give you, rather than say it's all general fund, it is all general fund, but there is dedicated resources associated with this. James collects almost half of his budget is paid from a variety of fees that is mentioned in your material. Recording fees, animal license fees, marriage and partnership fees, passport application fees, district elections, billing, etc. One of the things that James and I have talked about a lot, and I know he's going to be watching closely, is the document recording fee. I think it's fair to say that it's a bit of a cyclical type fee, and depending on kind of where markets, where housing and etc. is going, we have to watch that closely. I think as we look at this biennium, both he and I feel reasonably good as it relates to that, but I think it's something we're both going to have to watch carefully and make sure, are we starting to dip a little bit? And again, I will invite James, and I'm sure he will add anything that perhaps he would like to in relation to that as we go forward. So before I turn it over to him, his breakdown is two primary cost areas, records and elections. So you can see he's a little bit bigger on the record side at 20% as opposed to the election. And again, a lot of that is just in relation to some variables, both in relation to his his FTE increase as it relates to personal services. So that's a primary driver in that area. So with that, I think I will just let James go and give you an overview of records and elections.
Okay, thank you, Rick.
You bet.
Yeah, so just a little bit more on those fees. One of the fees that we do collect, we collect a lot of fees for other programs as well as state agencies. So they are affected when we have a downturn, like the CAFA fee that we collect the A&T fee on recordings. That's $10 per recording for that fee. We could collect $20 for the GIS program here in Benton County. And these aren't assessed on every single instrument. There's a certain set of instruments that get applied these fees. $60 for the housing, A&T housing fee is collected on almost every instrument that we record. There's a few exceptions that like DOR recorded instruments, for example. So we support a lot of different program areas. They're all going to be hit by the current downturn in the number of recordings that we're seeing as of late. But we, like Rick said, we really find it hard to predict when that could turn around, what the depth of a recession might be, or the duration. So going into our overview and our mission, so we enable property ownership and a vibrant local economy by maintaining the accurate real property records for deeds, mortgages, and liens. We support families and through marriage and domestic partnership. We have a domestic partnership registry, which a bill has just passed this year that is going to expand domestic partnerships to any persons that wish to enter into a partnership. And I think one of the reasons, it was actually the Clerks Association that asked for that particular bill. One of the reasons we asked for that is we wanted to see more consistency throughout the state. There's a lot of organizations that offer this as a benefit to their employees, where they have to come up with some sort of a process to be able to prove their partnership. And we think that the counties will become that standard now that it's entered into the statute. So that's just a little more information there. So we also have the, of course, the voter registration and election management for all local and federal state elections conducted in Benton County, which is going to be one of the challenges that I mentioned to you later. We also have the dog licensing program that we support, which was adopted back in the 70s due to rabies outbreaks, and that was kind of a community health issue that was addressed through dog licensing. And we support the Board of Property Tax Appeals, which Tammy mentioned to you, I think, and is partially supported by the CAFA monies as well. So we're comprised of the two divisions, which is, are you handling that part? Yes. Very good job. We have the records and licenses divisions, where we have the real estate records and the marriage licenses, as well as the dog licensing programs considered in that area. We also have the election and passport division, where we handle voter registration, elections, and we are certified as a U.S. passport acceptance agent, which we also do passport photos, and has proven to be somewhat of a revenue generator, but it's also generated a lot of work for us. So we're trying to balance that with revenue versus work. One of the benefits that we've seen since we moved to the Calapooya building is now we have the two divisions that are actually housed in one area, and we're trying to do more cross training to be able to support the different fluctuations in the workloads as needed. Not always easy with a very small team. We only have 6 FTE. Shown on the organizational chart, you can see the two divisions, how we break that up. Most of our FTE is seasonal as far as the numbers of actual bodies, where we have our on-call staff in the passports area and up to 40 seasonal workers that come in for the elections. And sometimes more in a large general election, we might have to even go above 40. But it's kind of unique to our department. You're not going to see a whole lot of those types of positions in other departments, but that's what's unique about us. We actually have a lower FTE in now than we did when I started here in 1998. So we've been able to do that by utilizing technology to a great deal to help us streamline our processes and keep up with our workloads. So some of the trends that we're seeing and maybe some of the concerns that we have, are there some serious legislative proposals that are out there? Number one, in elections. We usually see that actually every legislative session, but this particular legislative session, there's some proposals that could really impact our budget. So I just wanted to make this group aware of the potential for that impact and the costs, significant costs that might come out of some of those proposals to counties. For example, ranked choice voting. Then there's the automated voter registration proposal through OHA as opposed to DMV. Right now, we just do DMV, automatic voter registration. So it would expand that program. That generates a lot more correspondence. There's a lot of different impacts there. The other ranked choice voting might require multi-page ballots. It might require larger envelopes, which cost more to produce and mail, and also create a lot more work when you're dealing with more than one ballot page and a lot more expense in printing your ballots. So those are the type of issues there. Passports, as I mentioned, we've got a pretty heavy workload there. We've got we are quickly reaching pre-pandemic levels. Last month, in fact, we hit the highest number of passports that we processed, even pre-pandemic levels where we had been quite busy. So yeah, a lot going on there. We're doing everything we can to keep staff available for that process. Animal licensing, another area that we handle, has been pretty consistent year after year. We've been able to maintain that consistency and support that program by actually taking all of the vaccinations that go to the local vets and entering them into the system and sending out notifications to our the citizens that need to comply with the statute for dog licensing. We mentioned the recording downturn. I mentioned marriage and domestic partnership and border property tax bills. So I can move past that. So our goal number one is this coming budget is to implement an online shopping cart for real property record review, copies and certified copy orders using existing technology, which we use the Helion system and the Records and Elections Department for our real property records and receipting. We also use it for dog licensing and for the border property tax appeals. And I'm excited about the potential integration with the assessment and taxation system. In that, one of the functionalities is we can share our recorded instruments with them directly, plus they can record like their tax, any delinquent tax warrants with us electronically, and streamline that process as well, and streamline the border property tax bills process if that's the direction we go. Second goal we have, I don't know if I need to mention the core focus areas because they're pretty large print on there, but it's environmental, natural resources, and responsible governance. Goal 2, we have our goal by December 31st, 2023, that we would implement an expanded appointment calendar for passport and marriage license services by 1 hour each day. And actually, we've moved quickly and we've already done that. So we met that goal before the budget even started, but we just the way we did that, and this is something that I talked to Joe about, is we went to what is called a 980 work schedule for some of our staff that they're going to be working longer days, but they'll take a day off every 10th day essentially. So they work a 44-hour week and then a 36-hour week for our full-time staff. And that has allowed us to have people present in the office more hours, which allowed us to expand our appointment calendar. That's how we did that.
Mr. Chairman, if I may, I just to make sure to provide James some cover here. They've been very diligent in putting goal 2 forward. You might notice that in that it said it was based on a policy package. But what I wanted to mention is that James actually has been operating with that 3/4 time position that he's been talking about. So that's aided him in his ability to do the goal. So I just didn't want you to look at it and say, well, gee, he already implemented, he doesn't need the dollars, but
Yes, I should also, thank you for saying
no,
that.
that's right.
Well, that was one of the challenges too, though, and we'll get to that in a little bit. Or are we at it right now? Yep. Okay, so here we are. This is what helped us to implement that. And added some stability to our staffing as well by having somebody there all the time to cover when our regular staff, because we have a really small staff, 6 FTE handling multiple programs. This position has helped us to bring someone in who's going to be there on a pretty regular basis, just like the rest of our staff. And allowing us to add that hour and cover during absences where people have their vacations or calling sick, whatever the case might be. And then you'll notice, or you may have noted, that we have a pretty small vacancy rate. That's because whenever I get a vacancy, I need to move really fast because we have a really small team and we can't be down even one person. And so that's why we do it the way we do it. And I've been lucky to be able to fill those positions thus far. The problem has been retaining some of the on-call positions that do the passport functions and help us with voter registration. Just simply because those particular on-call positions are limited to under 0.5 FTE. So you'll find that there's not a lot of people that under 0.5 FTE works for them in the long term. And they often move on to other more lucrative positions or whatever they're looking for, positions with benefits, those types of things. Did I lose my place? Where are we at? Package. Policy package. So this is the 0.5 FTE. So we have the 0.75 FTE, which was the limited duration in this budget that got approved by the Position Review Committee. And I funded it by reducing one of those on-call positions. So typically us holding 5 positions for on-call, we reduced that to 4 by adding this 0.75 FTE position. The cost is identified here by Rick. I believe we had some savings by not trying to fill that 5th position. We're just trying to max out at 4 on-call positions now instead of 5. And this has given us some of that stability where we went ahead and moved forward with that other goal. So on the challenges, one of the challenges that we have while all this is going on is we have a transition going on from our statewide voter registration system, which we call OCDR. We are migrating to a new package called Oregon Votes. It's a very tight timeline. We're working on developing the actual system as we go throughout this May election. We're planning to go live with the new Oregon Votes system in late July. So that's been one of the big challenges that we're trying to balance with all the other things that are going on. So keeping pace with the workload is another challenge, given that we have such a small FTE. And I mentioned earlier, we have less FTE in this department in 2023 than we had in 1998 when I started with Benton County. Attracting and retaining the qualified staff who are well suited for the intermittent positions in this department is a challenge that I have gone over with you. And the potential legislative impact as well. I've already gone over the opportunities. I kind of went over everything already with you guys. The passage of House Bill 2033 is actually what opened up the domestic partnership registry. And we believe that will standardize the process, and it will, I think it'll get my staff more familiar with working with domestic partnerships, which they had become unfamiliar since the implementation. We only see about 1 or 2 a year. We think we'll start to see more of those. And I mentioned already the opportunity of cross-training with the co-location. So that's it for me. Any questions?
Commissioner Wise?
Yes, can we go back to the policy package request and the 0.75 FTE? I apologize, are you actually adding new positions or is that just expanding current positions?
That was, I went to the position review committee and kind of funded that at the end of the fiscal year by eliminating the first we had some money, and then next we eliminated the 5th on-call position to help fund the limited duration. And I want to continue that into this next budget, but there's no telling if the other money will be there. So that's why it's going to be an increase. But it's a 0.75 FTE primarily for passports, which has picked up. So I believe it'll be paying for itself. But and it gives us the ability to add that hour, as Rick had mentioned, by stabilizing our staff and having people there daily coverage when people go on vacation, that sort of thing.
Yeah, I'm just trying to wrap my head around, we talked about the difference between FTE and like actual employees. I was trying to keep it straight in my head.
Yeah, Commissioner Wise, so one way to look at it, it really, it just is, it's a continuation, except as LD, it's a permanent. So basically the position I think James has filled, it's on staff, it's in the LD, so no guarantees of past June 30th. With this approval, it would flip it into a permanent position.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Other questions? No? Thank you, Mr. Morales.
Very good. Thank you.
Okay, Mr. Chairman, I assume just keep powering forward.
Yes.
Okay, we are on to the juvenile department. Matt Weatherall is joining me here. So jump into a budget overview for you before Matt kicks it off. Matt's total juvenile budget at the current service level for 23-25 is 5.98 million is what we're forecasting, which that's about an 18% increase from the 21-23 adopted levels. A little higher again, than what we have seen at the average of 14%. In terms of his recommendations, what you'll hear from Matt is he's got one policy packages and it's primarily for a reclassification of a position. So a relatively modest, small amount of increase of $22,000. And what that ultimately does is bring his request to, ultimately a decrease of 4% from his current service level. And the reason that is because back to the vacancy factor. So Matt's vacancy factor is about 6.1%. Again, my professional opinion is probably about average. That's, that's not a huge rate, but it's not a low rate. It's in the middle. So that's about $242,000. And that's, again, the reason you go from 18%, which is CSL, to 14% in total. Again, in terms of the position, the primary budget drivers, the only thing that's in addition to the typical that we've seen across the board in department is, again, a reclassification of a position that's really going to aid him in providing executive assistant type position going forward. Matt also similarly to, and again, this is probably a repeat in all, but to the materials and supplies, it's about a 5.5% standard inflation. But again, back to those central costs, what's driving a lot of that 30%. It's not as big as James, but Matt's not in this building. So, so there's a little bit, I think, a difference there that you see. The other piece in terms of the drivers as it relates to, again, back to Matt, maybe being a little higher than what we've seen as averages. and again, Matt will correct me if I get any of this wrong, but there's about a 80 to 90% increase in some dollars and grants that, at least that's what we're forecasting, from both the Oregon Department of Education and their Youth Development Division, as well as the Oregon Youth Authority. And I think these are primarily pass-through grants, or mostly pass-through grants, but again, increase forecasting is what, and it's all in materials and supplies, so that's what would bring Matt's budget up a little bit. No, please.
If I can speak to the increase, the dollars that we get from the Youth Development Division from the Oregon Department of Education, along with the dollars from the Oregon Youth Authority, have not increased greatly. They may stay flat for this biennium. Where we see that increase is passage of an automatic expunction law during the last big legislative session in the 21-23 biennium. And what that does is that created a pathway for youth that did not go to court for their record to be expunged. Now, there's work that has to go into that, and a formula was created. So we get, I think we're contracted with $38,000 for this biennium for us to do that work. So when we submit the expunction paperwork once a quarter, we get a check back from the Oregon Youth Authority for anywhere between $2,000 to $4,000, just depending on the number. There is legislation moving forward currently that will offer expungements to youth that were also adjudicated with a misdemeanor. So there'll be an increase in the number of cases that are done at that point. So they're looking at another formulary, and that's where that increase comes from. It's not necessarily an increase from the budgeted dollars that we receive from the Development Division or from the Oregon Youth Authority.
Thanks, Matt.
Thank you,
Appreciate
Rick.
that. You bet. Thank you. So the categorical spending, nothing much to see here other than everything that Matt just said is the reason you see a little bit of a shift in more expenditures in your materials and supplies, because the pass-through grants, that's what they fall into, is materials. Materials and services. Jen's probably back there saying, "Ah, well, he stopped saying supplies." So materials and services is what I haven't gotten acclimated completely to the county, so still using some old acronym. So that's the major shift in terms of categorical expending. Matt has a total of 15 FTE. Again, he's not asking for anything more other than a reclassification. So that will be both his CSL and his proposed budget going forward. We talked about the materials and supplies. To the pie chart, a little bit more funding here. That's always makes it more interesting. We got he has both the general fund and the local option levy fund. It's a little piece of that, 9%, or excuse me, 10% of that is local option levy. Again, back to giving you a little more information on the general fund. 9% of what goes into the general fund specifically is dedicated. So again, yes, it's in the general fund, but no, it can't be used for anything else by juvenile department and its programs. And again, I've listed both of those there that Matt just recently talked about with the Youth Authority and the Department of Education. And then the last piece, again, this is just how things are broken up a little bit. And I think Matt will address, any of the anomalies in this, but the juvenile accountability area, I believe that's where his pass-through grants move through. So that is the primary difference that you see there at that 32% for the current service level. That's why that would drive up a little bit more. And again, back to, you're seeing 18% in his operations area, 14% is diversion. Those are, again, not percentages that are out of the ordinary from what we have seen. And then, of course, overall, his budget is actually less than, and that's because he's not asking for anything, but the application of the vacancy factor brings it down by 4%. So with that, I will turn it to Matt.
Okay, so of course, our mission is protecting the communities and youth through accountability, community protection, and competency development. That is what's referred to as the balanced approach. And that is how we operate when we're serving youth and families. Our key functional areas are juvenile accountability and community protection, competency development, and outreach and partnerships. So the purpose, that's kind of a wordy slide, but the gist of that slide is we serve the entire family. We understand that the youth came to us, was referred to us for services, But at times, we work just as much with the family structure as we do the youth. So that is our main focus, and we attempt to link families to the community supports if needed, and then follow them throughout their process. Slide. Okay. Our organizational chart, as you can see, there is a vacant admin assistant position there. That is the position that we asked to be reclassified. And we'll get into that a little bit when we get into the policy package. But the reason for the reclassification, I'll just hit it now, is we feel that this level will meet our needs moving forward. And we were looking ways to track our data locally. We have a lot of data that comes in from the Oregon Youth Authority, but we don't have the ability or the expertise in-house to break it down to the point where we can determine where to best spend our resources. We have some anecdotal evidence of what works, but we want to really get into what actually works and are we hitting the right services at the right time. And so we would truly want to get to that data-driven point. So we're hoping to use this position to start to build those structures as we begin to move forward and looking at partnerships with other local juvenile departments to maybe share that some of that cost and that burden. So accountability, and community safety. So 3 types we have here. We have the informal probation, formal accountability agreements, formal probation, and then work crew and community service. Work crew and community service is more of a restorative piece. So we're taking those youth that have gotten into trouble, and we have various projects that they work on throughout the community. They run most weekends, and then with schools out, they run during the week also. We partnered with CASA recently. They helped them move their building and laid some carpet, I believe, and did a bunch of painting on the inside for them as they moved into their new space. We do Crystal Lake Cemetery, getting ready for Memorial Day here at the end of May. They've done some trail restoration and things like that around with the city of Corvallis. But the core of our work is how we supervise the youth in our services. Now, if I look at that this morning, when I looked, we had 101 youth in our services and the types of interventions. We don't automatically go for formal probation. That is the highest level of supervision, highest level of intervention. With those, we have 23 on formal probation. We have 24 on formal accountability agreements, which is similar, but we haven't taken those youth to court yet. We're giving them the opportunity to adjust behavior, deal with any problems they may have, and then hopefully we don't see them again. And we have 28 on informal probation. So those are kids that are in for a variety of crimes. Could be as simple as a petty theft, a shoplifting charge, could be a minor possession of alcohol or marijuana. We give them a diversion, we get them straightened back out, and then we send them back out, and hopefully we don't see them again. If we do see them again, they, of course, they then bounce to that formal accountability agreement. We do have 8 youth that we co-manage with the Oregon Youth Authority, and we have 17 pending matters. So we have 17 youth that are in various stages of, are they coming in for a formal accountability agreement? Are we going to take them to court and those types of situations? So our competency development, this is pretty important stuff. This is where we are, where the tire meets the road, so to speak. We have a qualified mental health professional on staff along with a qualified mental health associate to deal with youth that may have some mental health issues. I think the caseload currently right now, I believe that our mental health specialist has 10 youth that she is serving, both them and the family. That also ties over to our qualified mental health associate who helps build those skills. We do have a certified drug and alcohol counselor on staff. Mainly right now that is used for assessment to determine if we need a higher level of care. DBT or dialectical behavior therapy to deal with groups, to deal with kind of the behavior pieces that they may have, along with cognitive behavioral therapy to look at their thinking and how those things may move forward. The individual and family alcohol drug education, those are starting to ramp back up and get back into schools also. We do 1 circle group, so boys councils and girls circles. We do most of those in the majority of the schools throughout the county. We are partnered with Lynn County for North Albany, so that's working really well. We have groups running down in Monroe, as well as Philomath and the local high schools. And the newest one that we're looking at bringing forward is a parent project. We were offering parenting classes prior to COVID. We had to stop that just because we couldn't, it was difficult trying to do those online, and it kind of just fell off. We're starting to reinvigorate those. And we're looking at that curriculum. That is a 20-week curriculum. We have to go to training. There'll be 3 of us trained in the office to facilitate those. And I believe I have those mentioned in my goals also. So our outreach and our partners, strengthening rural families is a big one. The money that we get from the Youth Development Division to address youth that have not yet entered the juvenile justice system, but may be at risk to enter the juvenile justice system. That money from the YDD is passed through the strengthening rural families for them to do some of that work out in the rural communities. I do have an outreach specialist dedicated to the rural outreach to help facilitate and get those things moving forward. Jackson Street Youth Services, of course, for an alternative placement if needed, short-term housing. Of course, Benton County Behavioral Health, DHS, and the schools. So our first goal is by June 30, 2024, expand skill building and educational opportunities by facilitating 3 groups using evidence-based curricula. This is lifelong learning and education, community safety, and justice systems, and this is something that we currently do. The reason it was added was essentially because of the parent project. We want to make sure that we're starting to get those out. We're also starting to expand. We just sent staff to training to deal with the LGBTQ plus youth in the schools through One Circle. So we wanted to make sure that we're hitting those facilities as well. For January 1, 2024, work with the departments housed at Sunset and Calapooya to determine if alternative modes of transportation will allow for reduction in miles driven. I walk a lot between the 2 buildings. And I'm not sure what anybody else does, but if there is alternative modes, what does that look like? You know, is it bicycles? Is it electric scooters? What is that? So I'll be putting that work group together moving forward. And then by June 30, 2025, collect data as it relates to outcomes for youth in our services and those who participate in skill building and competency groups. This will serve to better identify where we need to focus our services in the future. And that ties to that position that I'm currently asking for as well. Your turn. It's math, it's money and dollars and stuff. That's you, not me.
So, thanks, Matt. So in terms of the policy package request for the juvenile department, as mentioned, this is a $5.98 million current service level. We are requesting an increase of $22,630 from the general fund specifically for the reclassification of position. But when you apply that against the vacancy factor that we put in place of 242, so ultimately Matt's budget is decreased by 219,000 in terms of after the application of the vacancy factor. But again, it gains him the administrative position that he's been looking for. Overall, again, it's about a 4% decrease, as I mentioned earlier, to the juvenile department. In terms of the next slide, again, this was the request that Matt had made to the county administrator. It is recommended as proposed. I think I will just say, you know, with the way the classification system works, I think Matt's current position is administrative specialist 1, I believe, or 2, and this would take it to a level of executive support in relation to being able to provide Matt with more of an opportunity in terms of a confidential management type position that would be able to do higher level supports. I know just from personal experience, having somebody like Lindsay is, as I mentioned earlier, is tremendous to be able to help from a support staff. And so I think I say this because you're going to see a couple more requests like this, both in my budget as well as human resources, to make sure that our departments really do, you know, support staff is so valuable in terms of being able to make a difference in our departments. And so I think you will see other similar requests to this for this AS3 levels, what we call it, to help provide that executive support. I'd invite Matt if there's anything more he wants to add about the value of that reclassification.
No, I have nothing further to add. I think I've hit it enough. All right, so challenges and opportunities. Challenges of service providers. As we look at this, you know, while we do offer many services internally, specifically our mental health, drug and alcohol, criminogenic behaviors, behavioral health, those types of things, At times, there may not be a good fit, and what I mean by fit is, I'm speaking specifically about my mental health professional, may not just be a good fit with the youth. So trying to find those external services for those youth is a challenge, and that just isn't a challenge here. That's pretty much statewide. We're having problems finding those types of providers. Could be mental health, could be substance abuse, problematic sexual behaviors. There's a lot of people working on this problem. We're just not finding a lot of solutions to this problem. So it's always something that we're constantly working on. Multi-system involvement youth. Now we have tremendous partnerships with DHS, with the schools, Strengthening Rural Families, DD Services. But at times there are multiple systems involved. It comes down to the question of who has the greater resources to help this youth. Now, not here locally, but statewide, the juvenile justice system sometimes becomes the default system for these youth because they have broken the law, and that may not be where they need to be. So understanding that, we take an active role within my department of determining which system is the best fit for the youth. And then we strive to make sure that we are not the default to those in many cases. When I talk about alternative placements, again, we have a great relationship with Jackson Street Youth Services, and we may place a youth there for a short amount of time, but they may not be a good fit there also. And they may be asked to leave or removed from that. Now, depending on where they are in our process, they can go back to detention, which is not always a good place for them to be, and we recognize that. But then we have to search for an alternative placement. That may be with a grandparent, an aunt, an uncle, a friend, family supportive sometimes, which again is not the best place for them to be. And this can be difficult to say at the very least, but we do our best. And again, this isn't just a local problem. This is a statewide problem. But we also have issues with finding higher levels of care. So if a youth needs to be in an intensive mental health or drug and alcohol treatment facility, we struggle with that. And behavioral issues. We've noticed an increase in behaviors in the youth over the past few years. We're doing what we can to help, but finding solutions has been a struggle. These behavioral issues can lead to involvement in the juvenile justice system, and sometimes we're not the place for them. But with alternative placements and multi-system involvement, we get pulled into some of these conversations. And I can think of a few cases where the police have been out to a house, issued a youth a citation. They've come to us, and working with the DA's office, with that partnership, we've decided that we're not going to go ahead and move forward with anything, but we are going to continue to track the case to make sure that the youth and family are getting the supports that they need around them. Some of the opportunities that we have, and I'm excited about this one, but the parenting project to me is an exciting project. This program has been around for about 20 years and it's seen a lot of success over the years. So we're excited to begin offering this moving forward. And I do have some departmental goals, as you saw, but I also have it tied to some employee goals to make sure that this moves forward as well. Expansion of services. The shift we see with this is in moving forward is in prevention and intervention services beyond the youth that are referred to us. And we want to get farther upstream, or I should say. Further upstream, can we intervene earlier in some way and maybe divert youth from the juvenile justice system? And I have staff dedicated to providing groups in schools at least 4 days a week. And like I said earlier, they are in the majority of schools within the county. And then I'm always expanding partnerships with people. This is something that is also a great opportunity for us in the community in finding ways for these youth to find success, regardless of where they are, and meeting them and the families where they are. So with that, I will stand for any questions from the committee.
Any questions? Commissioner Oswald?
One question, yeah, with the reclassification of the administrative specialist to admin specialist 3, does that person become a non-represented employee?
I'm not sure it does.
Commissioner Ojiro, I'm going to follow back on that just to double check, but I believe in the way we have done all the classification, it would be a non-represented management confidential employee, but I will double check that and correct myself if I'm wrong.
And in terms of the behavioral issues that you mentioned, and some of the kids not necessarily belonging in the juvenile department, I was just wondering, you didn't list among your partners our developmental diversity program, but are they also a frequent partner?
They are, when we recognize, or the school recognizes that we do have that issue, then yes, we do pull them in. I think we have like 3 or 4 currently, that we're partnership back and forth with developmental diversity to get them the services that they need.
Any other?
With the proposed expungement bill that's coming through, would you be partnering with the DA's office in order to pull that through? It seems that you would need judges and attorneys and all of those people to get those expungements through, or does it fall completely under?
It falls completely on us. What we do is and I'm not 100% sure on all of the mechanisms just yet, because the way that it currently works is we send out a letter that says, hey, this record is being expunged, please destroy those. So those pieces are going to be worked through, and we'll have a process set up. I know that has been part of the work groups of trying to determine exactly what that looks like.
Thanks.
Thank you.
All right. I bet we're getting an answer to a question.
Commissioner Oger, I stand corrected. It appears that it is continues to be a union representative position. I apologize.
Nothing else?
I just want to, if I
Thank you very
could,
much.
I would like to thank Rick and his crew for the help that they have given me and probably all the other departments as we've gone through this. So I don't want that to go unrecognized.
Thank you. And thank you, Rick.
So, Mr. Chairman, we're on the home stretch here. So this is, I know that your biggest day of multiple presentation, but we saved the best for last. And, I've been told I'm going to be dazzled here by this presentation. And I think we've got about 60 minutes planned for it. In all seriousness, though, again, it's a very important budget here, and with Vance, and I think we all agree that the work he provides, and him and Teresa, are just invaluable to all of us. So small but mighty is maybe the way to start with it. So I'll jump on in and give you a roundup, and then let Vance talk a little bit more about his shop. So first and foremost, as Vance alluded, it's not a huge budget. It's $908,000 is what we're looking at for the 2-year biennium. And I think I measured him as the smallest increase in the county at approximately 3%. He is a complete current service level budget. So I say that because there is no policy packages associated with this. He's not asking for anything. I will also say he is the only department, I should say office, that has a 0% vacancy factor, because he's been here forever. So I treat Teresa right. So I think the only unique thing, and Vance can talk more about, that is a little different in his budget construct than what we've seen before, is the law library. I think has traditionally been a temporary position that he's done. And I think through some of his shifting around, we have actually a portion of the FTE that is charged into the library. And again, I can let him talk a little bit more about that if necessary. But again, no huge things to really talk about in terms of changes. I will say, even though, again, overall his increases is 3% in total, he does have about a 15% in materials and supplies. And similar to the other 2 departments ahead of him, a lot of that driving is the central cost, particularly the URR. And now that he's in this nice fancy building, and there's additional costs associated with that, as well as, again, some of the financial services piece and some of the increases and expansion around centralization. There is a reduction in the contingency that I should note, and I think, Vance and I may be having some further conversations related. So we have dedicated revenue that comes into the general fund, specifically for the judicial department. That because of some of the changing around as it relates to our cost allocation, because everybody gets hit with cost allocation, everybody gets hit with various things. There is an increase there, which means the contingency is smaller. And so this is something I think we always have to look at, because there's a lot of cost centers that sometimes we hit that don't have enough revenue to sustain that. And sometimes we have to make adjustments. So this will probably be a conversation that Vance and I maybe, he's already smiling at me, that we'll need to have just to make sure we want to have a sustainable program. A lot of times what happens when you have a situation like this and you have a revenue support, it has to be paid. Obviously, it's a cost, but it gets moved to a different cost center, usually a general fund cost center. So that's something him and I will take a look at. I will say on the positive, the revenue is there to support it. That's good, but at the same time, I think we want to make sure it's a sustainable program over time. So more to come on that in terms of potential adjustments down the road. So that's that in terms of his changes. Nothing unique here as it relates to categorical. Both the personal service material supplies is primarily the increases that you see are offset by the contingency that I was just talking about. So you have less contingency and more cost associated with for this particular buying because we are tapping more into that resource that's there. But again, something to take a look at. Again, not another eclipse, just to, again, one of those not pretty boring pie charts, but the only difference between this one and the Board of Commissioners is this one's dedicated. So this is one of those general, every bit of the resources that go into pay for our Office of Legal Counsel or County Counsel is specifically dedicated. His dollars, the majority of them, 82% are based on cost allocation formula. So essentially all of the other departments similar to me and Human Resources and IT are paid. I haven't quite figured out why, and this is a construct of why he's in the general fund versus where other internal service fund, but I'm sure there's some history behind that as it relates, but it is all dedicated and it is generated similar to the same way some of our other central cost is done. And then, as I said, there's about 18% of that comes from the Oregon Judicial Department to support law libraries, and that's one of the functions they take on. Real quickly, again, just two primary areas, the Office of County Counsel, which is himself, as well as additional position, part-time position, and then the law library. And you can see in both cases, very small increases of 2% and 5% respectively. In total brings it to a 3% increase. And with that, I will bring on the star of the show, Mr. Cronin.
Every 2 years, I think the focus of my presentation is the law library. I don't think this is going to be any different. The law library has been in place since long before I got here. It used to be housed in the courthouse. And now it's in its own space next to ProPrint. The challenge the law library has is it is funded through money that comes from the judicial department that is collected on civil filing fees. And then Benton County receives its share, and then we split that money between the court for its domestic mediation program and the law library. So every year or every 2 years, we have a conversation with the court administrator about how to allocate those funds. Several years ago, we agreed on a formula. That formula is still in place. However, every 2 years, some group or some organization takes a look at those civil filing fees and feels like they are a source of revenue for some other purpose. So every 2 years, there's a constant battle to maintain funding for the law library. We've done a very, very good job over the years of building a contingency fund with those dedicated revenues in the event, and we know it's going to come at some point, those funds begin to dry up from the judicial department so that we have enough money to operate. Right now, Rick has identified those as a way to pay for the URR. Yes, we'll have a conversation, but that's the way of the world. Fortunately, we have the contingency fee to pay for that. But it is a historically, it's an up and down battle in terms of how much money we receive, how much the subscriptions go up for the legal resources, something we cannot control. So we're constantly mindful of the revenue and the expense that continues to climb in the law library. One other point about the law library, we have had a permanent employee. Just before I got here, it was classified as temporary. And it never seemed worthwhile to change it on the budget line simply because we were going to pay that person anyway, whether we called the person temporary, full-time or whatever. She retired 2 years ago and we simply shifted part of Teresa's duties over to become the law librarian. This year's budget reflects that shift and it does clean up the status of that employee in the law library. So there really isn't any change in personnel and the staffing. Is just paper. It's just on paper. So, and that's, do you guys have any questions about the law library? Gone into detail with that every 2 years.
Commissioner Malone.
Yeah, at some, so the law library is connected to the courts and courthouse, is that?
No, it is purely a county function. And I suppose I might have misled you a little bit when I say it was in the courthouse. It was housed in the courthouse. It has always been a county function.
And at some point, will that material be digitized and be available online, or is this current structure gonna go forever?
Well, we know nothing lasts forever. But in this case, we are in the process of transitioning to digital subscription services. If you ever go into the law library, you'll see that there are hundreds of law books. Unfortunately, the vast majority of those are we've let the subscription lapse because it's available online. Patrons can come into the law library, access our electronic collection through the password that we give them when they come in, and they can do their online research. We've not yet set it up so that someone can access it remotely at 6 o'clock on a Sunday afternoon, simply because we don't have a subscription service that allows for that kind of access that we can control and monitor. But, you know, I bet $1 that that's coming very, very quickly. It's just the way the electronic information is being distributed, that law library will be no different.
Okay, and then get to the easy one. I know what the concept of URR, but I don't know the words.
So thank you for bringing that up, because I was going to jump in and make a correction. Uniform rental rate. Sorry, thank you. $1, right? So make sure you're keeping track of me. I'll pay up at the end. But I do want to say, I want to make a correction to what I said. So many things going through your mind, and Jen helped me with this earlier. So the cost associated with the reason with the contingency is related to central cost allocation, but one of the primary drivers, and I think the biggest driver, is IT. Again, the cost allocation formula is kind of complex in how it works. It's driven by how many FTE do you have, what's your budget size, and I think part of this could be, I'm not positive, but part of it is the driving costs is there's an FTE in there, and then there, there's IT replacement costs. The reason I say this, the URR is not a factor in relation to this. So, because Vance is probably going, what the heck? This is it's a separate place and it's not subject to that. So I did want to correct myself. But again, and what I also don't know is because there are times where, like I said, there are decisions made because you have such a small program. The cost is the cost, you have to pay for it, but it maybe gets shifted somewhere else. That does happen on occasion, and perhaps the previous financial officer had maybe done that. And that's something, again, Vance and I can talk about, because we need to really look at the sustainability of the program. We want to make sure that there is a consistent dollar there, ideally to pay for all the costs, but certainly not to drive the contingency down to nothing.
Yeah, we had to, 6 years ago, we actually had to halt janitorial services because we couldn't pay for it, because we were running out of money. And ultimately, at the time, Martha Jenkins, the law librarian, and I, we'd take the trash out, and I would change the fluorescent light bulbs in there, fix the heater. But we now have, but that's sort of sort of the things we had to do, because remember I mentioned how the revenues would go down, but the cost for subscriptions would go up, and it ate up almost all of our contingency back then. So since then, we've done a good job of replenishing that, but that is something that we had to make a hard choice on. Where can we cut some of the expenses? And that led to conversations with facilities and finance about how much of the central cost allocation should really be allocated to a facility that has such a limited scope of services. So.
Other questions?
Yeah, just one other question. In terms of materials and services, I'm assuming that that's the budget line where we draw any external legal expertise from. And this is,
In councils?
yeah,
No.
no,
Oh, totally. Oh, yes. You're looking at the specific lines. Yes, it is. We have professional services, which is 8,000, which is what I have used in the past to call in an attorney when I go on vacations longer than a week. And we also have contracted services in there as well, but those are very small figures.
but the reason I'm asking is because in the last biennium, we've used more contract attorneys than we have the whole time I've been in office. And I was wondering where those are budgeted and whether they're reflected in this budget, because we know we're going to have more of those contract services in this upcoming biennium.
Those have been allocated to the department for whom those services are provided. So, for example, the franchise negotiations was on behalf of the board's office, so those costs were allocated to the board's budget. The anticipated cost, if there is a landfill application, land use application, would be allocated to community development.
Okay.
So we attempt to allocate the services to the department that utilizing.
Okay, I'm trying to wrap my head around it and thinking about future capacity and future needs in terms of county council for county. It's becoming more complex and where we have more need for specialized counsel than we have in the past.
Commissioner Ogier, we try to catch, those where we're aware that there could be a situation. Last one that Vance just alluded to, you'll see a policy package going forward of about $400,000 in community development that it would anticipate some legal costs associated with it. That's where that would pick that up, but we don't always catch it, right? In terms of, okay, suddenly we have to identify where can we find budget and, potentially do a supplemental if necessary. We also try to always build, I think all department heads try to anticipate that you might have certain needs going forward and try to build those into the budgets. But like I said, it isn't always caught, and then we have to address it when it does come up.
And for the Justice System Improvement Program, it's being allocated elsewhere also.
Yeah.
Yes, and that's, I was just about to jump in. The other outside counsel is the eminent domain litigation, which is being allocated, had been through the board, but Rick has caught it and is now shifting those expenses to JSIP. So for possible recovery through bond.
Absolutely. So yes, those are all being shifted into the JSIP as we speak, because there were being charged to the Board of Commissioners. But Vance is absolutely right. If I have the opportunity, I will be able to capture some of those in reimbursement.
Thank you.
Commissioner Wise?
The law library now has janitorial services, right? You're not still emptying the garbages.
Yes, it does. Yes.
Okay. If you miss it, you can always swing by my office and.
I'll do that on my way out. Yeah. Okay.
Other duties as assigned.
Commissioner Malone?
Oh, yeah, law library, is that a state mandated function, or do we see that out of the goodness of our hearts, or?
It is not mandated. Every county has the option to provide a county law library. There are a number of counties on the east side that do not provide county law libraries.
Thanks.
Yep.
Any other questions? No.
My goals are pretty self-explanatory. The first one has to do with boards and committees. one of the responsibilities for our office is not to staff, not to liaise with the county boards and committees, but to sort of coordinate them. And so one of the tasks that we have coming up next month is to put forward a training session for boards and committees so that they understand their roles as public officials, the limitations for public records, how public meetings have to work. And it won't be too late, but I will talk about election law as it relates to members of committees within their capacity as public officials when they're meeting as a committee. Next. Eminent domain litigation. This one is, I think, again, pretty self-explanatory, working with outside counsel who has the expertise to carry forward the litigation involving eminent domain, and I work with him very closely. Last but not least, trying to figure out a way to generate more sustainability in our office, and it's with 1.5 FTE. It's very difficult. So this may not seem like much, but for us, it's a big deal, particularly since it means that Teresa works remotely 1 or 2 days a week, which is fine. We've all gotten used to that over the last 3 years by necessity. But it does, in our very own small way, it does contribute a little bit to a little better sustainability footprint for Benton County. And that's it.
Questions? No. Thank you, Mr. Browning.
Thank you. So, Mr. Chairman, for the record, I'd like to just say that I was on track for the exact schedule with the exception of Vance Cronin. So he promised me, he actually made me go over 7 minutes, but no, in all seriousness, appreciate all of the department heads and their presentation today. I know today is, 5 different departments. It's a lot going forward.
Right.
It'll be 3 or 2. Just as a kind of a summary for you, wrap up next Monday is our meeting planned. You will have public works in front of you. You will have natural areas, parks and events in front of you, and you will have community development. And each of those are what I would say, the budgets that you heard today are, relatively and they're very important budgets, but they're not as complex as related to funding. So these next ones you get, I think we will continuously ramp up here a little bit more in terms of the complexity of the funding that goes with it. So that's our plan. In terms of the next batch of presentations, we are frantically working on getting those out tonight. As we speak, I think we're almost done with everything. We have one of our analysts that's kind of going through things, and I'm going to rush back and try to get reviews, but our hope is it will be out this evening. If not, I can promise you it will be first thing tomorrow morning. That way, at least you have some light weekend reading. Sorry. At this point, Mr. Chairman, that's it for us, unless there's any questions of any of the committee or.
Doesn't look like it. No, okay. We're done early. Everybody have a good time tonight at the event and a good weekend. And we'll be back together again on Monday. So meeting adjourned.
Thank you all.